Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Meet the Candidates 2021 Candidates for New York City Mayor. I'm Kathleen Culhane. I'm board chair of the New York City Employment Training Coalition, and I'm also president of NEW, Non-Traditional Employment for Women. And so happy to have you with us here today. For this morning, I have the pleasure of introducing Joey, who will be sitting down with Loree Sutton for the fifth of our scheduled conversations with the publicly announced candidates. Thank you to the members and partners that have joined us today to hear more from the candidates. The New York City Employment and Training Coalition supports our workforce development community to ensure that every New Yorker has access to the skills, training, and education needed to thrive in the local economy, and that every business is able to maintain a highly skilled workforce. NYCETC's membership is comprised of nearly 180 workforce providers, educational institutions, and labor management organizations who provide job training and employment services to over 500,000 New Yorkers, making us the largest city-based workforce development coalition in the country. Thank you again for being with us. It's now my pleasure to hand it over to our executive director, Joey Ortiz Jr., to begin the program.
Thank you, Kathleen. Good morning, everyone, and welcome again. My name is Jose Ortiz Jr., and I'm the Executive Director of the New York City Employment and Training Coalition. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Before we get started, all participants should know that you'll be muted for the duration of this call. Ms. Sutton will be provided an opportunity to talk about her candidacy and answer some questions in a fireside format. We'll then open it up for a few questions from several members and partners who are with us today. Please type in your questions along with name, title, and organization throughout the conversation using the chat icon located on the bottom panel. If you're called upon to ask your question, we'll unmute you so that you may ask your question directly to our presenter. Please note that we'll try our best to get to as many questions as time will allow. I want to thank you, General Sutton, for your leadership and for being here with us this morning. For some background on Ms. Sutton, Loree Sutton was born and raised in Loma Linda, California. Sutton graduated from Pacific Union College with a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration, Medical School at Loma Linda University, and the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College with an MS in National Security Strategic Studies at the National War College. A lifelong public servant, Ms. Sutton served in the military for over 20 years, where she became the Army's highest ranking psychiatrist and retired as a brigadier general. In 2014, she was appointed as a commissioner of the Mayor's Office of Veterans Affairs, becoming founding commissioner for New York City's department in 2017. In November 2019, Ms. Sutton launched her campaign to run for the mayor of New York City, which is taking place, as we all know, in 2021. Loree, welcome. It's really great to see you and meet you formally for the first time. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Jose. I'm delighted to join you this morning.
Let's start with just allowing for you to have a moment to introduce yourself to our community. So, tell us a little bit about your career in the military and New York City government.
Well, listen, thank you so much. Jose, when you reached out to me several months ago now, I was excited. I was excited to know that a group like yours was working on these so vital issues which the pandemic has exposed. And Kathleen, let me just start by thanking you for your leadership. And I look forward to meeting you and learning more about your work with non-traditional employment for women. But I'll tell you, Jose, over the last few months, as this pandemic and all of the racial justice issues and economic justice issues have really come to the fore, it just strikes me. With crisis comes opportunity. And so I'm just very excited to be with you this morning. I'm running for mayor to make our city work again. When I threw my hat in the ring last November, what that really meant to me then was to make the public sector, city government work better. I'd had an inside view of city government for 5 years, standing up the first municipal agency in 15 years here in our city. And so I had a good idea of what was working well, but what really needed to be fixed. Well, a year later, now, yes, I'm still running to make our city work again, but as opposed to the 3.5% unemployment of a year ago, now here we are at 20% unemployment, and we absolutely are in a position really at the brink of disaster if we don't come together, roll up our sleeves, yes, take a deep breath during these crazy times, but the road to recovery for all is paved with public-private partnerships. And I hope we get a chance to talk a little bit more about that. I'm so pleased to see that partnership theme run through your entire Recovery for All vision and report. Back to you, Jose.
Thank you. And you mentioned this a little bit already. Obviously the city has changed dramatically. We'll talk a little bit about that in a second, but I'd love to just dig deeper into, at the time that you decided to run, what was your inspiration? What was driving that feeling that you were best suited to run the city during what was a time that the city was doing particularly well, at least from an economic standpoint?
Yeah, Jose, let me give you just a little bit of context first, and then I'll go directly to your question. You mentioned that I was born in someplace else, Loma Linda, California, small town outside of Los Angeles. So I didn't come from New York, but after 30 years of serving in the Army, living all over the country and around the world, I came to New York. My then sweetie Loree, now wife, we came here in 2011, 2012, finally made the move to Brooklyn in 2013 in the middle of that mayoral election. And we love our city, absolutely love our city. This is our home. I have never lived any place else longer in my entire adult life than New York City. So I wasn't born here, but I belong here. And I'm thrilled to now be in a position to have a voice and a vision for how our city can truly move forward, how we can move from a tale of two cities to a city that works for all New Yorkers. So how did I get into this race? I certainly didn't come to my position as commissioner and then the founding commissioner for the city's newest municipal agency, the Department of Veteran Services. I had my hands full doing the work that I was doing on behalf of our 500,000 veterans and their family members here in New York City. But as I looked around over the last several years and I saw that things were headed in the wrong direction, I saw more seriously mentally ill individuals suffering on the streets and in our subways, putting themselves at risk as well as all of us around them. And I saw things going the wrong way. There were what should have been working relationships, constructive working relationships, for example, between the mayor and the governor. Well, we know what that's been like, and it hasn't gotten any better in the pandemic, oddly enough. But what that meant on a practical level for everyday New Yorkers is that, for example, as the mayor was working to decarcerate individuals at Rikers, certainly a noble endeavor, well, 30 to 40% of those individuals, however, have serious mental illness, and there was no provision made for their care or their well-being once they were out of Rikers. At the same time, the governor was slashing hospital beds and treatment programs for mentally ill individuals. And so the scenes that were never that close before really just started to pull away. And as a psychiatrist, I couldn't witness that without knowing that we could do better, and I know how to do better. Well, then came 2018 and 19, I saw that the politics of fear, frankly, was starting to take over. I saw career politicians who, started abandoning their lifelong views and positions and values and donors, and I saw a polarization start to take root in our city, certainly reflected at the national level, but in our city, I saw that take place in the discourse about wealth and the wealthy, about real estate, about elements of our city that were all of a sudden you were either for them or you were against them. Well, that bothered me, that troubled me terribly. And that led then to the Amazon debacle, which in my view was political malpractice at all levels. And it hasn't stopped there. More recently, Industry City, I think that was a lost opportunity for the kinds of jobs, the kinds of career pathways that all New Yorkers deserve, and particularly, as has been laid so bare by the pandemic, people of color, communities of color who have been disproportionately suffering and dying as a result of these disparities. This is a time for us to pull together. And so I kept asking myself the question, where is the leadership going to come from that can bring our city together, that can unify, that can bridge across differences, knowing that we're not going to agree on everything, but where's that leadership and where's that sanity that can understand that all voices matter? Let's listen to all voices. Let's have value-based leadership, never more important than these times of pandemic, life and death. But let's respect each other. Let's absolutely respect each other. Let's work together now to develop a new city covenant to replace the tattered old social contract that never really worked for all New Yorkers. We know that. In fact, remember when the numbers started coming in about the disproportionate numbers of Black and brown New Yorkers who were suffering and dying from the COVID virus? The talking heads, the elites on TV, acted like this was some big news and some big surprise. Well, obviously, they haven't spent much time in our communities. They haven't talked to working families, to entrepreneurs, to immigrants, to people and women and communities of color who have been suffering for way, way too long. So, we need leadership. We need sanity. I'm a general. I'm a psychiatrist. I know the city from the inside out, and I thought, I'm putting my hat in this ring. And here I am today, a year later. In fact, today is the year anniversary since I did take that step. And I have never been prouder to stand up in this moment, particularly with how everything has changed now over the last year in ways we never could have anticipated. And, I'm here to serve. Service is my North Star.
Well, that's the power of our country and democracy. It's really wonderful to have incredible diversity in all the voices that have thrown themselves into this particular race and at all levels. But you touched on a number of things that I wanted to address. That you spoke, specifically about the disproportionate impact of the virus on Black and brown populations, particularly on the health side. But the world has completely changed since the time that you launched your campaign. The last 8 months have been incredibly taxing on every American, every global citizen, in fact. But it has disproportionately impacted our city. At the height of the job losses back in the spring and early summer, New Yorkers, about 1.25 million New Yorkers had lost their jobs and faced steep economic insecurity. Around 892,000 private sector jobs and government jobs were lost. 330,000 of those jobs were independent contractors. So it was really incredibly terrible for New Yorkers specifically. As of September, that hasn't improved much, unfortunately. The employment rate stands at 16%, with marginalized communities facing the highest rates of displacement. And this is compared to a statewide unemployment rate of 9.7% and nationally around 7.9%. So, given all of that and everything that you've mentioned, how has COVID and also how has the Black Lives Matter movement, which of course was incredibly prominent during that time and remains so, how has that changed your priorities in any way, if at all? And please elaborate on both pieces if you can.
Absolutely. Let's start with Black Lives Matter. I am fired up to bring the issues that have festered for so long, both in terms of the social determinants of health, whether it be access to quality health care, to nutrition, to safe and affordable housing, to neighborhoods that don't make your kids sick, to safe transit, to all of the things that disproportionately people of color, and in the instance of the George Floyd's death, has just uncovered exactly what we need to be paying attention to at a time when we've got so much going on and so much crisis, but with crisis comes opportunity. And so I've been very proud to to be in a position where here in New York, I truly believe that we can lead the way. We can honor and respect all lives, certainly. As I saw at, there was a Black Lives march that I attended, and there was a young woman of color who had on a t-shirt, and she said on it, she said, I said, Black Lives Matter. I didn't say only Black Lives Matter. Of course, I know all lives matter, but let's start with Black Lives Matter. And I look forward, you know, if I was so fortunate to be trusted with leading our city forward and lifting up all New Yorkers, I truly look forward to listening to the voices of our Black and Brown communities and figuring out together. You've got the attention of the leadership locally, at the state, at the national level, also the attention of the private sector and the philanthropic sector and the social sector. But here's where I think it's going to be really critical. It's one thing to recognize that capitalism as a brand hasn't been performing so well. You saw the National Roundtable of Business Executives about a year ago now, last fall. They got together in DC, and for the first time in forever, they recognized that they really need to broaden their mission statement. So it wouldn't be solely focused on maximizing returns to shareholders, but rather that and investing in communities. And I got very excited at the time because I thought, boy, I can hardly wait to sit down with those CEOs, many of them, of course, here in our city, and talk about what that means. Because if you're going to invest in communities, you really have to spend time in communities and time listening and watching and learning and observing and engaging in conversations, difficult conversations. And, you know, the pandemic kind of put that a little bit on pause. But then with, you know, all of the unrest from George Floyd's death in late May, we saw again a sort of a blossoming of at least awareness and, you know, messages on the internet and signs in windows, and, you know, a lot of folks truly from their heart recognizing that Black Lives Matter must become more than a saying or a motto. Now we've got to operationalize it for the long haul. And I look forward in the less than 8 months now between today and the Democratic primary next June. It's hard to believe, Jose, but I look very much forward to sitting down with both community members from communities of color, and particularly Black lives, who have so much to say and so much for us to learn and listen to, and also members of our, you know, private sector and small businesses and not-for-profits and philanthropic and the public sector at all levels. We have to sit down and respect all voices and then figure out, what does it mean for Black lives to truly matter? It's got to be more than a saying, more than a slogan, more than a protest. We got to convert that now to real action that matters for all Black New Yorkers, all Brown New Yorkers, all New Yorkers. That's why, again, I'll come back to your vision for New York's equitable economic recovery. It's for all of us. Now, Jose, I took off on the Black Lives Matter, but you also asked me a question before that. I want to make sure that I get back to that question. What did you ask me, the first question?
Yeah, the first part was really about the just the extent of the economic insecurity that the city is currently dealing with as compared to the rest of the state and the nation. So I prefaced that with about 16% unemployment being the case here in the city, whereas statewide is closer to 9.7% and 7.9% for the nation. So, you know, nearly for the nation, nearly half of what we're currently experiencing here in New York City. So, you know, going back to that question, you know, how has your approach to governing and your priorities changed as a result of that you know, really dire circumstance for the city?
No, thanks so much, Jose. Listen, I think that for any of us in leadership positions, whether it be in government or private, public, philanthropic sectors, wherever we are in the community, for each of us, one of the toughest things to do right now is to let go of everything we thought we knew about our city, our world 8-9 months ago, and to look at our city anew through fresh eyes. And I think that when we do that, we'll, as your report has laid out so vividly, we'll see those disparities. Isn't it troubling that the largest city in our country, the wealth capital, business capital of the world, that we would have those kinds of disparities when it comes to unemployment, when it comes to health outcomes and disparities in income? I think that it's a call to action, and it's so striking that this is where the opportunity comes, that we are in a moment as we reimagine our city and reinvest in what that city needs to be so that it will work for all. We have opportunities that we wouldn't have even thought of 8-9 months ago. Things like how can we partner with small businesses and help them, whether it be restaurants or boutiques or Broadway or not-for-profits? How can we make sure that the heart and soul of New York City not only survives, but becomes positioned for thriving in the world that we are now in and the city that we are now in a position to rebuild? And so I take those numbers very seriously. And I think that we've got to lead with the data, and we can't be afraid of holding ourselves accountable. Every one of us has to determine, what are the values that we live by, that we govern by? For me, I lead with heart, honor, empathy, accountability, respect, and teamwork. And so moving forward, the road is paved. The road to recovery for all is paved with partnerships. But I'll tell you, the realizing that recovery for all is paved with a greater capacity to reach out to all New Yorkers, to partner together, yes, but to respect all voices and to know that our greatest treasure resides in the very New Yorkers that we have invested in the least. That's got to change. And in a Sutton administration, I can assure you that it will.
Great to hear. So today's November 5th. We're 2 days past the election. So it would be a little tone deaf to not mention that. Probably a little more anxiety than usual, depending on who you supported in the last election. And ballots are still being counted across the nation to determine who is going to be our next president for the next 4 years. These are two incredibly different people, in President Trump and Vice President Biden. Their values, their approach to governing, their communication style, et cetera, possibly even their approach to working with the leader of New York State and the leader of New York City. So how does your approach to governing and leading the largest city in the country change dependent on the outcome, if at all?
Well, as mayor of New York City, the mayor of New York City's got to form productive, constructive working relationships, as you said, both at state level with the legislature and the governor, as well as at the federal level with the president and with both houses of Congress. We haven't seen those kind of mature, capable, productive working relationships. That's something that would certainly be central to my approach. I think as we look at this election, and just before we got started, Jose, I saw on my phone a little banner that came up saying that Biden is on the cusp of victory. We don't know that that's true yet, and certainly I'm so proud to live in a city and a country that has marches now saying "Make every vote count." And now, yes, count every vote. So we don't know yet when the votes are counted. My values won't change. My commitment to reimagining, to reinvesting and rebuilding, lifting up all New Yorkers, that will not change. So what would change? Certainly, if the current president is reelected, and I've been on public record working very hard as a veteran for Biden, as a senior national security leader for Biden, so it's no surprise where my druthers are in this race. But no matter who wins the White House, every one of us as Americans, we got to take a deep breath. We got to roll up our sleeves, and we got to get ready to work together, respecting all voices, and, you know, embracing those things that unite us. And I think there are more things than we realize, listening to the day-to-day media and sort of rabble of commentary and news around us. But I think that where those differences exist, let's identify them. But let's then figure out how to build bridges over them, because there's much more that connects us than what divides us. And so I think, let me take one further step back, looking at the larger election. I think that every one of us ought to be really, really humbled right now. I don't care what side you're on, what party you are, what you've been, working for, which campaigns you've been active in. We need to listen to New Yorkers. We need to listen to the American people, and just maybe there's some wisdom there that if we stop talking so much and start listening more, we could learn a whole lot more from. So that's my commitment. And as much as anyone, I'll be glad when all of this is over and we can then roll up our sleeves and start the work ahead. We got a lot of work in front of us, no matter who wins.
Absolutely. So you've mentioned this a couple of times and around our Recovery for All report that we released over the course of the summer. And as you know, the vision that we set in this particular report, which includes a wide range of recommendations that are focused on the small business sector, on public works initiatives, equity, of course, driving much of it, but also have a number of priorities and recommendations around that, and of course, workforce development. This was driven by 80 leaders across the private and human services sector that included labor unions, small businesses, large businesses, think tanks, workforce development, and other organizations. But there was a primary focus, and we've heard a lot about that today from you, but a primary focus on displaced workers and marginalized communities. So were there any specific recommendations that stood out to you or that align with your vision for the city in this current COVID economy?
Absolutely. One of the things I really like about the Recovery for All vision is just how inclusive it is. I've read a lot of reports that are coming out, and there's some very good work that's being done in this area. No doubt there will continue to be more work, more attention paid to this area. But one of the things that really stood out to me was both your commitment to marrying up workforce development with economic development. Inside city government for the last several years, it seems like while there's been a lot of resources that has been put into both of those domains, there's been less integration than what I think ideally would be the case. There's been less oversight, less coordinated oversight from the city council. I think that it has to be an all of the above strategy that links up our economic development so that we're talking to both the futurist as well as the current employers, as well as the current industries, the current opportunities in our city. We have to be linking up those voices with the voices of those who are educating, who are training, who are preparing and developing, and not just waiting until they're either out of high school or out of college or graduate school. No, let's invest early. Let's revamp the middle schools, which are in terrible shape in our city. Let's get past the false, sort of debate between charter schools and conventional schools. Let's focus on the learning, the training, the preparation for all New Yorkers to become citizens who succeed and who are prepared to serve. So to be able to establish those pathways, those apprenticeships, those exposures for our middle school kids, to make sure that our special ed coursework and our talented and gifted coursework, that's really a priority of ours. We can't pretend, as we are now forced to make really, really tough budget system, decisions. We can't pretend that our values are somehow separate from this process. No, if we value success and recovery for all, we invest in it. First, you got to reimagine it, then you got to reinvest, and then you got to rebuild it. So I really like the way that you have an all of the above approach. You look at immigrant business owners, you look at business owners of color, you look at folks, women business owners, you look at, all the heart and soul. You look at the heart and soul of our city. And I think that too often in recent years, workforce development, it's almost been treated as more of a charity as opposed to the central, the heart of the matter. It's the workforce, it's our people, it's our essential workers, as we've said during the course of this pandemic. And it's not just about supporting them where they are, it's about developing those pathways to invest in their potential for where they can be. And so that was important to me. That jumped out. It jumped out the partnerships, the apprenticeships, the recognition that there's no cookie cutter approach. We need to let our kids know that there's all kinds of things. And certainly here in our city, if you can dream it, you can first see it. It's here someplace. And let's develop those pathways to exposure, and then those opportunities for really developing those interests. I also think that, as we've watched the educational system here in the city really devolve into name calling and needless divisiveness, I think, let's focus on something that really is a very positive opportunity. Let's build on the progress that has been made already in the city. I think there's 25 or 30 of our city's schools that are in the most troubled and the communities and neighborhoods that have really not received the attention, the investment, the opportunity that other parts of the city have. Let's work to build on making our schools true community centers. And there we can build in community health hubs. I think that's a fantastic idea. And certainly in the wake of the pandemic, we have to have interoperability with our city health data systems. We have to have the opportunity for career counseling at our community centers. Used to be called schools, but let's call them community centers. Parents ought to be able to come in with their kids and identify their career goals and have the opportunity to access those resources. Let's have the private sector adopt a school. Let's have families adopt a family. It's all about relationships. And I just think there's so much opportunity if we can focus on what joins us, which is the learning, the future, the success, the citizenship, the capacity for service of all New Yorkers. We'll find ourselves both asking different questions as well as coming up with different answers. I'll say one other thing, Jose, about that, because I know you also focused on public infrastructure and investment. I think that's so critical. I think when it comes to, opportunities like NYCETC, first of all, when I heard the news last week that NYCETC doesn't yet have broadband across the city, and that we've got school kids today in shelters who don't have access to wireless, to the internet, so they can't access their learning, and that it's not going to be fixed until June. That's wrong. We're New York City. Come on. We can do better than this, but we have to prioritize things that we would have said were impossible 9 months ago. Guess what? Leave it behind. Give it up. This is the world we're living in. And yes, with crisis does come opportunity. And when it comes to the public investment, to think about what we did as a city, as a nation during World War II, and the investment in the WPA and the public works, which still are here in our city today. I think there's tremendous opportunity there, and I would look forward to learning from each of you and your very diverse and gifted and experienced strategy workforce. And together, there's nothing we can't do. We just got to roll up our sleeves and make it a priority. Back to you, Jose.
Thanks, Loree. So just a couple more questions before we transition to questions from the audience. And some of those might be directly from some of our participants, and some of them might be ones that have been sent in. So just as an FYI, but what lessons do you feel that you gained as a result of your time as Veteran Affairs Commissioner? And when thinking about that, of course, generally sharing some of those lessons, but how do they apply to workforce and economic development issues here in the city? And I think you touched a little bit upon this, but I'd like you to unpack that a little bit more. How does that vision and approach differ from the de Blasio administration, particularly when it comes to economic equity and opportunity?
Sure. Listen, I am so grateful to have had the opportunity to serve in the city for these last 5 years, and I'll be forever indebted to the mayor for taking a chance on me. I was relatively new to the city, didn't have what a lot of mayors would look for. I didn't have votes, I didn't have money, I didn't have connections, but it turned out that I had something that both the mayor and the first lady were looking for. All 4 of their parents had served in World War II. In the mayor's case, his father had brought the war home with him, died by suicide when the mayor was 18. And so both the mayor and the first lady had firsthand knowledge of both the blessings and the burdens of being in a veteran family, of the struggles and the strengths. And they were committed to finding someone to appoint as commissioner in what started out as the Mayor's Office of Veterans Affairs, and then later became the Department of Veterans Services. But they wanted someone in that position who could make things different for this generation of veterans and their families. By that reckoning, I was a perfect fit. Came into the job. It was, an office very small, never more than a handful, 4 or 5 people, hardworking folks, great commissioners, Mike Handy, Terry Holliday, and others from years past. But there's only so much you can do with 4 or 5 people in a city like ours. And so a year later, with this convergence of leadership, both the mayor, then the speaker Melissa Mark Viverito, Eric Ulrich, the new chairman of the Committee on Veterans, and then this multi-generational cohort of, yes, veterans and their families, but also civilian allies, great civic leaders here in New York who knew the importance, the strengths that veterans bring to any community, and wanted to make sure that New York was leading the way. We became the first nation to stand up a municipal agency solely dedicated to the strengths and needs of veterans and their families. Now, that said, we went from 4 people in MOVA to 44 in the new department, small by city agency standards, and intentionally so. What we realized that we had the opportunity to design and build and grow was an incubator, a laboratory with which we could take on the toughest challenges facing our city, like homelessness. And by setting up the policies, the partnerships, the resources, by bringing everything to bear on behalf of veterans and their families, we were then in a position to be able to apply those innovations to the greater population of homeless New Yorkers. And so there, I'll just brag for a moment about this team of teams, but our nation as a whole over the last several years has decreased veteran homelessness by about 47%. Here in New York, where the vacancy rate for affordable housing, as you well know, is less than 1%. We took that number down by nearly 90%, and it didn't happen by accident. We stood up peer teams. We set up a vet tracker. We set up a hotline for landlords to be able to call us. we started working on the supply side to look at the various projects like the New York Land Opportunity Program, which takes decommissioned churches and structures that no longer meet their initially intended use, but now can be partnered with the city, with the owners, and with the community in a way to redesign and recommit those structures, like veteran service organizations, like the old American Legions. We had just gotten started on that track in the last year that I was in city government, and I think you'll see that pick up once again as we recover during this next period. When it comes to workforce issues, I'll tell you what I've learned. That's actually part of that's informed my my commitment to developing a closer relationship, a better integration between workforce development and economic development. You know, in my position as Commissioner for Veteran Services, the new agency, you know, veterans issues are New Yorkers' issues, are veterans' issues. So I got a chance to work with virtually every policy and programmatic issue across the landscape. And I would look forward as mayor to being able to really develop that same model where we would be able to, not just with veterans, but to develop more incubators, more laboratories, more ways in which we can demonstrate the value of investing in all New Yorkers from the time that our New Yorkers are very young and still in elementary and middle school to all the way through the career cycle to fully invest in their potential. And to that end, we actually became the first city agency to partner with a federal agency and develop a social impact bond program for employment for veterans with PTSD, working with the federal VA here in Brooklyn as well as in the Bronx. I would want to see those kinds of innovative efforts continue. Again, not just for veterans, but to be able to apply those innovations across the city. You know, sometimes I think there's a connection here between veterans and between the New Yorkers who have, you know, grown up in communities where they haven't really gotten the resources they've needed. People have perhaps made assumptions about their potential and steered them towards paths which will prevent them from ever reaching their potential. Some of those New Yorkers of color, brown and Black New Yorkers, folks who came from the toughest parts of our city, you know, I worked with their brothers and sisters in uniform, and I learned about what it had been like growing up in those communities. And I'm all the more committed to helping all New Yorkers understand that truly, not only are we all in this together, if the pandemic's taught us anything, please, it's that my health is related to your health, is related to our community health, and we gotta do better. We can't tie our health care just to employment. We saw what happened, as you mentioned, with the 1.2 million lost jobs. We've got to reimagine, reinvest, and rebuild. And so my experience here working in every single borough, every neighborhood on behalf of veterans and their families, I'd extend that as mayor to every single New Yorker. Think of me as kind of an Ed Koch mayor. He said, you know, how am I doing? Well, for years, the last 30 years, including these 5 years in New York City, every time I see my team, how are we doing? It's about we, us, and our. Together, we can do so much more than we ever could apart. And that's probably the biggest lesson that I've taken, not only from my experience working with veterans in the city, but also for those 30 years working in the Army.
And one last question before we hand it off to our first question from the audience. But you've spoken about a number of different things, and you know, maybe limiting it to the areas that we haven't covered. But what are some of the other areas that you expect to be your priorities during the first 100 days?
Absolutely. the first 100 days, I think that one of the things that we can do is, throw out the question to New Yorkers across the city. What are the parts of your neighborhood, your community that have just been ignored? Maybe it's an abandoned car that's in an old lot with trash that's piling up. Maybe it's a city park that the playground doesn't work anymore. Maybe it's, have you ever been to City Hall Park recently and seen around the municipal building, which, the David Dinkins Municipal Building? But look at those kiosks. They got, graffiti all over them. They're falling apart. It's a disgrace. Things like that exist in every single borough. And what I would want to demonstrate in the first 100 days, first of all, I'd be out all over the city in those first 100 days, but demonstrating, to be a mayor, that's not just something you are, it's what you do. Let's make mayoring by walking around. Let's make mayoring a verb, and to demonstrate to folks that, yeah, there's a new sheriff in town, a new mayor in City Hall, and it's a mayor who's listening, boots on the ground. And then not only to listen, but then to learn and do something about it, and to do it together, not for a community or a neighborhood or person, but with every community, every neighborhood, every person. I am so excited about that possibility, Jose. I can hardly wait.
I think we will need to change the new sheriff in town to. We're going to open it up for a few questions, and our first question is from Irene Branch. Irene is the Chief Development and Evaluation Officer at the HOPE program. Irene, are you there? Let's see. Irene, can you hear us?
I can hear you, yes.
Hi.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. What's on your mind? How can I help?
So thank you so much for your time this morning. And I have appreciated your bold ideas around K-12 education. My question is around, though, the tens of thousands of unemployed and underskilled adults that we have in this city right now. And so I was wondering if you could speak directly to, kind of aside from K-12 interventions to improve our future workforce, what you would do to help address the needs of those tens of thousands of adults who need access to the workforce right now.
Absolutely. My office here, my headquarters is in Lower Manhattan. I'm the only office here in this building that's open. I look across, there's an 18-story building. There are 2 lights in it today. We know, and that affects then, of course, all of our essential workers, the restaurants in this area, the bodega owners, the boutique shops, the taxi drivers. I mean, it has a ripple effect that cannot continue. What we also see, of course, as you well know, we see the empty storefronts. Well, here again, with crisis comes opportunity. And I would be very excited about not just finding ways to reimagine our restaurants. Some of that is going on right now with the outdoor dining and with all of the heaters now for the winter and the cold weather. But I think we can put that on overdrive. We can, enlist our designers. We can bring folks who perhaps have been left out of the workforce. Let's develop some on-the-ground apprentice programs. Let's take those storefront empty places. Let's bring in artists. Let's bring in learning centers. Let's bring in tech. Let's bring in some life, some excitement. And yes, let's give folks who have been left out of this economy, let's put them to work. I'll tell you, this is something that I've talked a lot about, and I don't think I've mentioned it yet here this morning, but what we have to do to fully reach a recovery for all in our city is we've got to restore safe streets, safe schools, and safe jobs. And that's a critically important area. And I think there are ways in which we can take folks who are currently homeless, currently out of the workforce, currently really in a state of despair, and who perhaps have even resorted to putting themselves at risk as well as others. We've got to reach out and we've got to talk to them. I talk to them every single day. And I look forward to the day when I can actually do something about those conversations. Right now, I plug them into city resources, into not-for-profits. Let's just take a moment there and talk about the role of not-for-profits. One thing I've learned in New York City and really come to appreciate over the years is just how much our city invests in human and social services. But as I talk to folks who run nonprofits, they tell me that contract processes are delayed. They may not get payment for months and months. And even when they do, the indirect services, the city tells them, listen, you can get that money, you can get that from your donors, your philanthropists. Well, guess what? Have you talked to a donor lately about investing in indirect services? They're not excited about that. They want to invest in programs. So it's the city's function. It should be a government function to recognize that you can't just implement programs without having the infrastructure to support them. So that's something that I think needs to change. We can't expect the folks who are on the ground in the front lines saving lives and putting folks to work. We can't expect them to go months and months on end without getting payments and then not getting sufficient payments for fully supporting the programs that they're operating. So I think that's an important piece of this. I mentioned before the notion that we have an opportunity through places like Industry City, for places like Long Island City. I haven't given up on Long Island City yet, and maybe it's not Amazon, maybe it'll be another company, but we have so much potential there with folks who have been left out of the workforce and who want to work, who have skills that can be developed and values that they want to apply to a life of dignity and a life of respect and a life where they can feel and know that they're contributing to a common purpose. So those are some of the things that I can tell you about in terms of my approach. I also look forward to learning from folks you, folks who are on the ground every day and who can tell me, more than I would ever learn from any other source. You can tell me, what are you looking for in the next mayor? And in fact, right now, actually, that's something that I'm doing. I'm calling Jose. I realized that as I looked at your strategy work group that I've already called several of your members, and now I've got a whole sheet of folks to be able to call and to just ask the questions I'm asking all over the city. What are you looking for in your next mayor? Give me your candid feedback. This is not a time or a place to bash or to call names or to cast fingers. No. It's time to roll up our sleeves and figure out what can we do better. I know for sure working together will give us a good start. So I look forward, Irene, to calling you and asking you that question and learning from you in greater depth on your ideas and your experience that inform the work that you're doing every day. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question is from Josh Tenenbaum. We're going to give Josh a second to come on so we can ask it directly. And we'll let you know when he is there. There's
Sure.
on Zoom, as you know, at this point. So be patient.
While we're waiting for Josh, I'd just say one other thing about safety, Jose. Public safety and public health, those are not Republican or Democratic issues. Those are New Yorkers issues. Those are human issues. Those are American issues. So you can count on hearing much more from me on that as well. Josh, are you with us?
Sure am. Thanks for your time. And this has been a tremendous insight into the vision that you have around our city.
Yeah.
As a venture capitalist that's been focused on breaking the barriers that low-income communities face in achieving upward mobility, one of the things we're cognizant of is the partnerships that it takes to realize that vision. And specifically in terms of kind of cradle to career pathways, curious how you are thinking about really two things, the specific partnerships necessary to drive that initiative. So things like leveraging and improving CUNY, as well as the role of technology in actually accelerating that vision. Thank you.
Josh, thanks so much for that question. First of all, I think CUNY is such a gem and there's so much we can do. to just, it should be the central, the fulcrum of our cradle to career lifespan for New Yorkers. And so I appreciate you bringing that up, and I look forward to working with the relatively new president or chancellor of CUNY as well. I think when it comes to tech, this has been one of the great success stories over the last several years. I think really Mayor Bloomberg, with his background, understood that the city really needed to start diversifying its workforce. I think this mayor has invested and continued that trend. And now we are really on the brink of, demonstrating what we knew all along, and that is we have here in New York what Silicon Valley, Boston, Austin, any of those places will never have, and that is we have the world right here. That is our greatest strength, our people. And now we have a chance to reimagine, to reinvest, and to rebuild those, actually in this case, it's build those pathways for the communities and individuals, the kids of color who have not had access to those resources. I think that, in the Army, non-commissioned officers, our sergeants up to command sergeant majors, it's interesting, their leadership motto, you wouldn't expect this from the military, I don't think, but it struck me from the very first time I heard it. Be, know, and do. What it really means is, our sergeants are the backbone of the Army. Well, here in New York City, our kids, particularly our kids of color and from all over the world, and we're the crossroads, they are the backbone of our city. Small businesses, not-for-profits, Broadway, cultural institutions, that's the heart and soul of our city. But the backbone, we gotta invest in the backbone. And so I see a tremendous opportunity in technology. And I love what, I've been reading up over the last several years, the work that the Partnership for New York City has laid out. And of course, most recently, their call for action and collaboration. I love the way they're, working to bring together kids from CUNY, link them up with employers and trainers, and work not necessarily to a degree, but to a skill set that can allow individuals then to, get a notch up on the career chain. If they want to go back to college, sure, they can do that. But you know what? We don't need everybody in New York to go to college. We need good construction workers. We need great drivers. We need good tech coders. We need all kinds of folks to make our city work. And I think we need to value all kinds of work and not risk our kids growing up feeling like, oh, I either get into a specialized high school or my life is a failure. No, let's show them all of the different paths. I was just learning recently about this new high school that's embedded in Brooklyn Naval Yard. I can hardly wait to go and see it. I've been working with an entrepreneur over in Industry City. That's what's informed my viewpoint that we've lost another opportunity to invest in jobs, in pathways for the least advantaged among us, but those who carry the most potential as the backbone of our city, to move us forward, to lift us up. So I'm very excited about learning from you, Josh. I know that I had the opportunity to work with Minerva Tentico. She was the city's first chief technology officer, and I know that before the pandemic, there was a lot of talk about how AI is going to change the workforce and going to change the nature of employment, going to change the opportunities that are available. That's kind of gotten lost in the dust, at least for common. You don't see much about it right now, but I want to learn from you. I want to figure out, let's re-engage that conversation. Let's figure out how can New York City, how can we take the lead in that? We got to be a global hub. We got to be a global hub for green energy and really figuring out how we can develop an all of the above strategy that doesn't cripple the city or the region in the near term, but actually positions us for long-term resilience and sustainability. I think that, let me just close on this point with something that it's bothered me ever since I learned about the RPA, the Region Planning Association, or the Region Plan association. A couple of years ago, someone told me about this great association that's existed for over 100 years, and every so often they pull all the regional experts together, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and they lay out their recommendations for how we could collaborate, not just in the city, not just in the state, but as a region. I am very excited about the opportunity to think broadly through that kind of lens, particularly if it turns out that the Senate stays in the Republican column, and whether or not the White House turns. I'm not going to put my eggs in the bucket that somebody else is going to come in and save the day for New York. We've got to figure out worst case scenario, and I love the way the partnerships program lays out the best case, the middle case, and the worst case scenario, because we got to be ready for any eventuality. But I think, as I've asked folks over the last couple of years, why don't you see more of this, these RPA, visions and strategies and plans and initiatives? Why don't we hear more about that? And I've been told, oh, yeah, RPA, they do great work. Great folks come together and have great ideas. But by the time anyone is in a position of sufficient power or authority to actually take action and implement those initiatives, they've already made their promises. They've already, had the handshakes. They've got a lifetime of positions to defend. And so it just doesn't get done. Well, Jose, that gets back to where we started here. That may have been true. I don't know, the last 8 or 9 months I rejected. I will never believe that that's true, but certainly 9 months later in this new world we find ourselves, I think we have the opportunity to really come together as a city, as a state, as a region, and to do things that we just a short time ago would never have considered possible. So Josh, I look forward to meeting you as well. You're going to be getting a call from me, and I'm going to learn some more from you. But I hope that's helpful in terms of just explaining how I view these kinds of challenges and opportunities.
Thanks, Loree. Thanks, Josh, for the question. I'm actually going to hand off our final question to Annie Garniva. Annie, who you met on the call, is our our Director of Vice President, new title, so struggling to get it out, of special initiatives. So Annie, take it away.
Hi, Loree. Thank you for a very informative past hour. So my question, you very briefly mentioned climate. So wanted to know a bit more in detail how you see the role of workforce and economic development and partnerships that you've mentioned as a key component of the climate challenge that we face. And especially how you would connect those pieces to the low-income and moderate-income communities that we've been speaking and that have been locked out of past economic opportunities, and how we make sure that this time around, A, how you would go about investing in sustainability issues, and B, how you would incorporate the populations that we care about.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for that question, Annie. I think this is another issue where kind of, analogous to our discussion about CUNY, which CUNY is just such a gem in our city's educational system. Well, when it comes to climate change and investment in green technologies and sustainability, let's start with NYCHA. Let's train residents of NYCHA through apprenticeships, through retired tradesmen coming back and working within the system, through bringing the best expertise in terms of green energy and designers and building on the work that's gone on in this city, certainly for a long time, but all the more so following Sandy. Many of the folks who were most affected by Superstorm Sandy lived in neighborhoods that were most vulnerable on every level. So part of this reimagining and reinvesting process has to start at its base, not as a tack on, oh, let's develop this for folks or programs here that we know more about. No, let's invest in the communities who have the greatest skin in the game and who will absolutely, I'm confident, will take this on as a matter of pride, whether it comes to our recycling and reuse practices, or whether it comes to, the bigger issues of sustainability in terms of our coastlines and our energy sources. But there's no question we've got to start with educating and training and inspiring, frankly, those New Yorkers who all too often are thought of last, if at all, or even worse, as an add-on to where it feels like something charitable to do. No. This is not just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. And I look forward to really learning from you, Annie, and so many others in this area, because we gotta learn like our life depends upon it. We gotta lead like our life depends upon it, because it certainly does.
Thanks, Annie. And Loree, so we just want to thank you again for participating today and for your thoughtful responses to a wide range of questions. And obviously you've heard about the critical issues in our community and across the workforce development sector, but I wanted to give you a few last seconds to just make a closing statement and share anything that you haven't already or want to emphasize.
Sure. Well, Jose, thank you so much. Thank you for your time, for your work, for your engagement, for your partnership. This has been really fun talking with you all. And I learn every time we have one of these conversations and dialogues. And let's just take the pressure off in this moment. And can we just say that this is the beginning of an ongoing dialogue and conversation and partnership and movement? I would look forward to that. I want to finish out just in the last couple of moments here. I had started to tell you about the be, know, and do from the Army NCO's motto. The assumption there is who you are as a leader. It needs to start. Who am I? What are my values? I mentioned to you, I lead with heart, honor, empathy, accountability, respect, and teamwork. Who you are then leads you to what you know, what you learn, who you listen to, who you ask. And I've described to you today, my most important lessons I learned from talking to folks on the street. I learned from making phone calls to leaders like yourselves and asking that question, what are you looking for in the next mayor that will help you better serve the New Yorkers in your charge? And that then leads to, once you know who you are, what are the values that you carry with you that you apply to your personal life and to your governing decisions, that influences what you know. And you've heard, I learn from all sorts of sources, but I find that the most important sources come from people on the street and people like yourselves who are in leadership positions and are actually boots on the ground doing the job. That then leads to the final thing. You know what your values are. You know what you know because you've applied those values to seeking out knowledge and information and wisdom, sometimes from the most unlikely sources, but that then ultimately influences what you do. All too often, we start with, what are you going to do? That's important, but let's back up a little bit and find out, for any of us who are running for mayor or for any position of public trust, what are your values? What do you know? Who do you listen to? What have you learned? And then we can talk about what you do. And I want you to challenge me as much as I challenge myself. Together, we're going to learn. We're going to fail. We're going to fail faster, and then we'll learn better. I love Maya Angelou's saying when she says, "I did what I knew to do, and when I knew better, I did better." Isn't that liberating? So I'll just close with this: that I draw inspiration from the lives, the sacrifices, the lessons that giants leave for us to consider. And when it comes to running for New York City Mayor, there's a plethora of heroes to draw from. But if I were just to pick 5, Eleanor Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt, Shirley Chisholm, Bella Abzug, and yes, Mayor Ed Koch. They are my inspiration. They will continue to guide my vision, who I am, what I know, and ultimately what together, each of us, all of us working together can do.
Thank you, Loree. And that concludes the fifth of our conversations with the 2021 candidates for New York City Mayor. A quick program note, please join us 2 weeks from today on November 19th for the sixth of our Meet the 2021 candidates. We'll be speaking with Maya Wiley. Our most recent addition to our series is also Catherine Garcia, who is scheduled for January 14th. Stay tuned for announcements of additional candidates in the coming weeks. Thank you again for joining us this morning. We appreciate all of you who have had the opportunity to be with us. And thank you again, Loree, for being with us. We wish you the best of luck with your candidacy and enjoy the rest of your day.
Same to you, Jose. Thank you so much. More to follow.
Take care.
You too.